Thank you, Professor Ikora, for the introduction.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to give a presentation as a plenary speaker at PacRim 11. I would first like to express my thanks to the organizer and the organizing committee members for providing me with this honor. During the last 15 years, I have been interested in understanding grain growth and microstructure evolution in polycrystals. Well, today I'm going to speak about what we have studied and its implication and its future direction in research of grain growth. Well, in my journey of studying and understanding grain growth, I'm indebted to many people, in particular my former students. And here is a list of my major former contributors of my former students. They are now working as professors at universities and also researchers at National Institute and private research institute. Well, let me start talking with showing three different types of grain growth. Here you see three different microstructures are shown here. These microstructures were obtained from the same starting material, 0.11% titanium excess barren titanate, and after the same thermal treatment. Nevertheless, the microstructures are very different. On the upper left here, we have very fine grains here, and then when we held this sample for a longer time, up to 100 and 200 hours, there had been no grain growth, no change in microstructure, showing stagnant grain growth behavior. On the upper right here, you see big abnormal grains embedded in fine matrix, of which the size is about the same as that in the sample showing stagnant grain growth behavior. On the bottom left, here the grain size is moderately large. When you held this sample for a longer time, and grain growth occurred continuously, showing more or less normal grain growth behavior. Why such a big difference in microstructure and grain growth behavior in the same material after the same thermal treatment? Why? My answer is it's because of a difference in grain boundary structure. And then you may ask another question. Is there any principle that can explain such a different types of grain growth behavior in polycrystals? My answer is yes. Well, I'm going to explain more in detail of my answer to these questions and also discuss its implication and its future direction of the research. Well, when you look into a two-dimensional microstructure, as the grain sizes are different in sample, there must be a curvature between non-zero curvature between adjacent two grains, as shown, for example, shown schematically here. It doesn't work well. And because of the non-zero curvature, and also in effect because of the size difference, there is a pressure difference, capillary pressure difference between two adjacent grains. You have any? Okay, well, the grain with a convex grain boundary has a high capillary pressure, and the grain with a concave grain boundary has a low capillary pressure. So there's a capillary pressure difference. Because of the difference in capillary pressure, there's a difference in energy and chemical potential. So the driving force for the migration of the boundary is, of course, the capillary energy, which can be expressed by this equation. And 2 gamma boundary over R is the capillary pressure, difference between the two adjacent grains and the molar volume. Then, how about the atomic is in motion under this capillary pressure? And then atoms will jump across the boundary, and then from the grain with high chemical potential to low chemical potential. And this process can be expressed by a simple free energy distance diagram from one grain to the other grain, 2 grain. And then there is an energy difference, capillary energy difference. And because of the capillary energy difference, the atoms will move from one grain to the other grain. Of course, for the movement, there is an energy barrier because of the energy instability of the atom between the 2 grains, and which is expressed by delta G star here. We call activation energy for diffusion. So the mobility of the boundary is expressed by the absolute mobility of Einstein, diffusion coefficient divided by RT, which is expressed as exponential function of the activation energy here. And from this understanding, we can easily deduce the classical law of normal grain growth when you accept the mean field concept and assume that the mobility of the boundary is constant. So the growth rate or shrinking rate of a grain is proportional to the mobility of the boundary and the difference in capillary energy of the average grain size and the size of the grain concerned. So upon integration, we can easily deduce the scale law of the classical grain growth, normal grain growth. And so grain coarses as we increase the annealing time. And one of the characteristics of normal grain growth is that the grain size distribution, relative grain size distribution, does not change with the annealing time. When you plot the grain size distribution, of course, the grain size distribution broadens with increasing the annealing time. But when you plot the grain size distribution relative to the average grain size, the grain size distribution is invariable and showing stationary grain growth behavior. This is an important characteristic of normal grain growth. But in real systems, the grain growth behavior often deviates from the ideal law and normal behavior, showing typically abnormal grain growth. So you have big abnormal grains embedded in phi matrix. So for abnormal grain, several causes have been proposed. One cause was the presence of second phase particles at the boundary. Another cause, suggested cause, which was suggested in the 1960s, the segregation of impurities at the boundaries. And another cause is the formation, presence of thin liquid film in certain grain boundaries. It was suggested in the 1970s, but recently revived as the different types of boundary complexions by Martin Hammer and his co-authors. And another cause suggested was the anisotropy in grain boundary energy and the mobility. Well, based on these different causes and mechanisms of abnormal grain growth have been proposed, and the models also abnormal grain growth was proposed. But none of the conventional mechanisms and models can explain abnormal grain growth observed in many different systems. These models cannot generally explain the grain growth, abnormal grain growth observed in different systems, also in the same system. And one of the common features in the classical mechanisms and models is that all the process was assumed to be governed by the diffusion of atoms across the boundary. So boundary migration velocity. Boundary velocity is expressed by the mobility of the boundary and the chemical potential gradient. And the mobility is expressed by the exponential function of the activation energy and the driving force. And even in the presence of second phase particles of impurities and liquid films. For example, in the case of the presence of second phase particles drag the boundary motion, and the effect will appears as a reduction of the driving force, delta G. And when impurities are present at the boundary, this effect also appears as a reduction of the driving force. When there is a liquid film, it changes the activation and also diffusion distance. And when there is an anisotropy of grain boundary energy and mobility, it also affects the driving force and the activation energy. But the mechanism itself was assumed to be diffusion control. Then, is there any possibility of interface reaction control of boundary motion? If the chemical potential of atoms is different when an atom which was transported from one grain to the other grain does not have the same free energy state chemical potential of those already present in other grains. For example, as schematically shown in this figure, it increases the activation chemical potential. Then the energy state of this atom can be larger than the driving force. In that case, the atom has a driving force to move back from the original site, exhibiting interface reaction control motion. Whenever there is an atom transport in materials, this is a result of serial processes of diffusion and the interface reaction. And one of the typical examples of the serial processes of diffusion and interface reaction is the case of crystal growth. When a crystal grows, this is a result of diffusion of atoms through the liquid matrix and the attachment of atoms at the surface. So serial processes of diffusion and interface reaction. One of the characteristics of the serial processes is that the slow process governs the overall kinetics. For example, you transport your product to one place to the other, and the transport rate is higher than the deloading rate. Then the deloading rate will govern the overall kinetics. If the transport kinetics is slower than the deloading rate, then transport rate diffusion will govern the overall kinetics. So in the case of the crystal growth, when the crystal shape is rounded with an infinite number of surface defects, atomic defects, then the attachment of atoms then means the interface reaction kinetics is much faster than the diffusion rate. Therefore, for the growth of such a round spherical crystal, the interface reaction is faster, therefore the diffusion will govern the overall kinetics. On the other hand, in the case of a faceted crystal, interface reaction is predicted to be a certain function of the driving force. So, for example, in the case of a two-dimensional nucleation and growth, in the case the growth rate is an exponential function of the driving force, as this dotted curve shows schematically. But the diffusion rate through the liquid matrix is not affected by the shape of the grains. Therefore, the diffusion rate is expressed by this straight line. That means there are two regions where interface reaction rate is slower than the diffusion rate, and another region, the other region, where the diffusion rate is smaller than the interface reaction. Therefore, as the characteristic of the serial processes, the slow process governs, and then when the driving force is smaller than the critical value, then the growth rate must be governed by the interface reaction. And if the driving force is large enough, larger than the critical value, the growth rate must be governed by the diffusion, showing a nonlinear growth behavior of the crystal. Then, how about the case of the grain boundary? The grain boundary can also be categorized into two types, when it's rough, rounded, and faceted. When you look into the grain boundaries under high resolution electron microscope, the rough boundary has a disordered, atomically disordered boundary, and under S.J.L, the boundary is rounded, curved. But in the case of faceted boundary, the grain boundary atomic structure is fairly ordered. So there is a difference in atomic structure at the boundary. And as this example shows, the boundary type can be controlled by simply changing the oxygen partial pressure, in this case barium titanate, in hydrogen in air. So we can make the boundary faceted or rough by changing oxygen partial pressure in the case of barium titanate. But also we can change the grain boundary structure by adding dopant or changing temperature. And what will happen when the grain boundary is atomically ordered? We did a model experiment, and then we simply changed the oxygen partial pressure from hydrogen to air in barium titanate, and measured the fraction of faceted boundaries. And then the fraction of faceted boundary was almost nil in hydrogen, but it increases rapidly and becomes almost 100%. All the boundaries are faceted in about 30 minutes because of the high diffusion rate of oxygen in barium titanate. And then we observed the microstructure, and then after changing the atmosphere from hydrogen to air, and 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 and 48 hours. So as you can see here, densification occurred a little bit, and then grain growth occurred. But after 30 minutes, there was essentially no change in microstructure. So we quantitatively measured the average grain size and the relative density as a function of the annealing time in air. And then grain growth occurred a little bit, and then densification occurred also. But after 30 minutes, there was no change in grain size and the density. This result indicates, when you compare this measured grain size and the density with the fraction of faceted boundaries, and then we can easily notice that when the boundary is fully faceted, there is no grain growth and no densification. This result indicates that there is a critical driving force for grain growth and densification when the grain boundary is faceted. There is no material transport. So we measure the kinetics of the migration of faceted boundaries by model experiment using bilayer samples of single crystal and polycrystal, 1O single crystal with polycrystal, and 210 single crystal polycrystal. And then, of course, the driving force for the migration or growth of single crystal is expressed by the average grain inverse of the average grain size in the polycrystal, and the average inverse of the single crystal. This is about 0. And then we change the average grain size of polycrystals, and then that means we change the driving force for the growth of the single crystal. And during the annealing, during the growth of the single crystal, there is essentially no change in microstructure in the polycrystal. That means we were able to keep the driving force constant. So that means we just measure the diffusion growth distance, then we can estimate the kinetics of the growth of the single crystal. That means the migration of the faceted boundary. Well, this is a result of the migration distance as a function of the driving force, which is inversely proportional to the average grain size of the polycrystal. As you can see here, apparently there's no migration when the driving force is small, but as the driving force increases, that means the average grain size decreases in the polycrystal, then migration distance increases more or less linearly with the driving force. Similarly, in the case of 2-1-0 plane, the migration distance is more or less linearly proportional to the driving force, and the driving force is smaller than the critical value, then there was no migration. And there was a deviation from the linearity because of the segregation of impurities at the boundary. When the impurities accumulate, the diffusion kinetics, of course, is decreased. That's the reason why there's a deviation in the linearity of the measured values. So this observation and the results suggest that the migration of the boundary or solid-liquid interface is governed either by interface reaction or diffusion when the boundary is faceted or at least partially faceted. So when the driving force is large enough above a critical value, then the atoms that were transported to the surface of the growing grain remain. But if the driving force is smaller than the critical value, then the atoms will return back to the original grain and showing the interface reaction controlled growth. Now, let's consider a growth of many grains and shrinkage of many grains. And this mixed control of boundary migration is similar to the mixed control of solid-liquid interface. So we can apply this idea to the migration of the solid-liquid interface and grain boundary as well. And from this, we can deduce the mixed control model of grain growth. Consider we have a number of grains, numerous number of grains, and each grain has its own driving force for growth or dissolution. So the largest grain will have the maximum driving force for the growth, and smallest grain will have the maximum driving force for the dissolution. So for example, in such a microstructure, this grain will have the largest maximum driving force for the growth in the sample, and here it's schematically shown in this figure here. And if the sizes of all other grains are the same, but we have a large grain here, and then maximum driving force will increase, of course. So we can change the maximum driving force in the sample by changing the average grain size and the grain size distribution. And when the grain boundary is disordered or grain shape is spherical, in that case, the migration kinetics or growth rate is linearly proportional to the driving force. And of course, in that case, as in the classical theories predict, the grain growth behavior is normal. But when the boundary is faceted or grain shape is faceted, then the growth rate is not linearly proportional to the driving force. There is a non-linear region. And so our growth behavior must be non-normal and non-stationary. And the contribution or effect of this nonlinear region to the overall kinetics will govern the growth behavior, grain growth behavior. And quantitatively, we can predict the effect of this nonlinear region by comparing the maximum driving force and the critical driving force there. And so there must be a coupling effect between the maximum and the critical driving force in the polycrystal. This idea, this model is a totally different model from the classical ones, because in this model, the grain growth is controlled either by diffusion or interface reaction. But in all classical models, the diffusion control was assumed. So there's a fundamental difference between the present and the previous models. This model allows us to predict the effects of various processing parameters on grain growth in polycrystals. For example, in the case of initial particle size, consider we have two different initial particle size, small and fine and coarse, but the grain shape is the same. And in the case of fine grains, then the maximum driving force is high, and the maximum driving force can be comparable with the critical driving force. In that case, only a small number of grains who has the driving force is larger than the critical value will grow appreciably along this line, and the rest of the grains will remain unchanged in their size. That means abnormal grains form. A few small number of abnormal grains will form. On the other hand, in the case of a coarse grains, and the maximum driving force is lower than that value, and then can be lower than the critical, then none of the grains will grow appreciably because their growth rate is almost nil there, and then showing stagnant grain growth behavior. We can also predict the effect of the critical driving force for the same average grain size. In the case of the rounded, disordered grain boundary, in that case, normal grain growth is predicted, but in the case of faceted grain boundaries, maximum driving force can be larger than the critical value. A critical driving force is comparable with the maximum driving force. In that case, like that case, the abnormal grain growth will occur. If the critical driving force increases further, for example, here, then none of the grains will grow appreciably, then stagnant grain growth will appear. So when you change the critical driving force by changing temperature and adding dopant or changing oxygen partial pressure, we can expect to observe different types of grain growth behavior, for example, normal, abnormal, and stagnant. And let me now show you some examples that support these predictions. First, the effect of the maximum driving force. We start with a fine grain and coarse grain in barium titanate, and in that case, big abnormal grains form after a certain period of time. But in that case, there is essentially no change in microstructure. Average grain size didn't change at all. So this experimental result is in accord with our prediction of the effect of the maximum driving force. In that case, maximum driving force is large enough, and the sum of the grains grow appreciably, forming abnormal grains. In that case, maximum driving force is smaller than the critical one, and none of the grains grow appreciably. And this is another example that shows the effect of the maximum driving force. We took titanium carbide, tungsten carbide, and cobalt system, and cobalt forms a liquid dark area, and tungsten carbide grains faceted white areas, faceted grains. Titanium carbide grains are gray areas, rounded grains. In this particular sample, we have two types of grains, faceted and rounded grains, in the same liquid matrix. But the grain growth behavior is totally different. Rounded titanium carbide grains grew continuously. The estimated variation of the total vacancy concentration as functions of oxygen partial pressure and the donor dopant concentration. And depending on the donor dopant concentration and oxygen partial pressure, the grain boundary structure, of course, changes, and rounded and faceted. And the numbers in circles show the fraction of disordered boundaries, rounded boundaries. And when the total vacancy concentration is low, the grain boundary is well faceted. Total vacancy concentration is high, then the grain boundary is well smoothly rounded. So we prepared many samples under different experimental conditions, and then observed the microstructure. Of course, there are many samples that exhibited abnormal grain growth, other samples, normal grain growth. When you compare the micrographs observed with the previous, you see grain boundary structure and total vacancy concentration, we can easily notice that abnormal grain growth occurred in the samples with faceted boundaries, and normal grain growth occurred in samples with round boundaries.
We did a more precise experiment using the barium the same material. And then this is a measured variation of fractional faceted boundaries as a function of the oxygen partial pressure. As the oxygen partial pressure decreases, the fractional faceted boundary, of course, decreases. And so when we prepare samples of the different oxygen partial pressure, here in that case, the grain growth is quite normal. That means most of the boundaries are rounded and rough, and normal grain growth exhibited. This observation is, of course, related to the much larger maximum driving force compared with the small critical driving force. And then the oxygen partial pressure of 10 to the minus 17 about, abnormal grains formed. That means critical driving force increased, although the maximum driving force was the same because we started with the same powder, and then abnormal grains formed. And then for the increase of the fractional faceted boundaries, that means critical driving force increased further, and the stagnant grain growth. And for the increase of oxygen partial pressure is the formation of one-on-one twins, and so although the maximum driving force increased further because of the presence of one-on-one twins, the critical driving force for grain growth is reduced because of the twin assist grain growth occurred, and then because of that, big abnormal grains that contain one-on-one twins form. So all these experimental observations support our prediction based on the mixed control of boundary migration grain growth. And we also tested the effect of temperature. Here in this case, the niobium carbide and cobalt. At low temperature, grain shape is faceted. At high temperature, grain shape is rounded. And at low temperature, abnormal grains formed, and at high temperature, normal grain growth occurred. This observation is, of course, related to the variation of the critical driving force with temperature, because we started with the same powder, same composition. And at high temperature, critical driving force is negligible, but at low temperature, critical driving force is considerable. And if the maximum driving force is comparable with the critical, then abnormal grains form, as this left microgram shows. Now, let me know the last example that exhibit different types of grain growth here in the same sample. It's a ultra fine grain nickel, 180 nanometer. This is not ceramic material, but 180 nanometer powder nickel. And then we sinter the powder compact of nickel. And then here, abnormal grain growth occurred in 550 degrees C. And the abnormal grains impinged upon each other. And after impingement, there is essentially no change in microstructure, grain size, and then as shown in these two figures. This observation is, of course, related to, can be explained well by the nonlinear behavior of the boundary migration. And then we prepared samples at different temperatures, 550, 750, 950, 1150. And in 550, abnormal grains formed, and this is abnormal grain. Black area is a fine 180 nanometer matrix. And 750, these abnormal grains impinge upon each other. When we held this sample for a longer time, there was essentially no change in microstructure, and grain growth did not occur. But at 950, the impinged grains, among impinged grains, abnormal grain formed. And that means secondary abnormal grain growth occurred at 950. And 1150, the quite normal grain growth, normal microstructure. And we prepared many samples of the different experimental conditions. Take, for example, the samples sintered on yield for 1 hour. This, at low temperature, primary abnormal grain growth occurred, and the stagnant grain growth, and the secondary abnormal, as I explained just before, in the normal grain growth. these variations of grain growth behavior in the same sample, depending on temperature, can be, of course, well explained by the variation of the maximum driving force and the critical driving force with temperature. So at low temperature, 550, maximum driving force is comparable with the critical driving force at 550. Then some of the grains grow abnormally. But after impingement, the abnormal grains impinge upon each other. The maximum driving force, of course, decreases considerably. And meanwhile, as normal grain growth occurs, and at high temperature, normal grain growth occurs. So all these experimental observations in accord with the prediction based on the nonlinear migration behavior of the boundary and the mixed control model of grain growth. So we also did many other experiments to support our predictions and our model, and then different systems. Here is a list of other systems we studied. All these systems we studied are in accord with our prediction based on the mixed control model of grain growth. And two-phase systems also, we did it, and then some systems that were studied by other groups are also listed in red. So, grain growth behavior in polycrystals is very different from system to system, and also for different processing conditions in the same system as these micrographs show already. But none of the classical mechanisms can explain different types of grain growth behavior observed in the same system or in many different systems. Each previous mechanisms or the models can explain for the grain growth behavior in some specific systems, but they cannot explain generally the grain growth behavior in many different systems. But our new mixed control mechanism or boundary migration can explain all the different types of grain growth behavior in the same system as well as in different systems. So we developed a mixed control model in boundary migration, and then we added the grain growth behavior there. We proposed mixed control model of grain growth. From this, we can deduce the principle of microstructural evolution, which is a result of coupling effect of critical driving force and the maximum driving force. So when the critical driving force is 0, then of course normal grain growth occurs. But the critical driving force is non-zero, but much smaller than the maximum value, then the growth behavior must be quite normal. And the critical driving force is comparable with the maximum driving force, then abnormal grain growth will result. And the maximum driving force is much smaller than the critical value, then no grain growth, stagnant grain growth. And this fundamental understanding of grain growth in polycrystals and the principle of grain growth behavior, we were able to develop a new technique of crystal growth, as namely solid-state conversion of single crystals. We provided the theoretical principles of the solid-state conversion of single crystals. So solid-state conversion of single crystals is a different, total different crystal growth technique from the conventional melt growth technique. And when you put a seed crystal on a polycrystal, and if the seed crystal grow into the polycrystal and scavenge all the polycrystalline grains, then the polycrystal converts into a single crystal. And in order to use this technique, we need to suppress the grain growth in the polycrystal. If grain growth occurs, then the large grains in the polycrystal will impede the growth of the single crystal. So we need to control the microstructure, that means suppress the grain growth in the polycrystal. And we were able to control the grain growth in the polycrystal in piezoelectric systems. And my colleague, Dr. Ho-Young Lee, Professor Lee, was able to grow big piezoelectric single crystal, as shown here, PMA-PZT, centimeter size, and there's ring-shaped, needle-shaped single crystal, also the crystal composites. And we wrote together a feature article in the Journal of Microstructural Society last February, and we describe all the principles and the application of the principle to grow single crystals, piezoelectric single crystals. And what are the remaining issues? We can consider two areas: structure and migration of grain boundary, and grain growth. In structure and migration of grain boundaries, atomic observation and characterization of system of grain boundaries would be desirable, would be good for the future development of grain growth understanding. And then atomic observation and calculation of boundary structure, transition, faceted and rough, ordered and disordered. We need to consider effects of dopant temperature and oxygen partial pressure. And in the area of grain growth, simulation of grain growth, of course, in facet systems, in particular in solid state, and also the observation and simulation of grain growth behavior with respect to other minor parameters, for example, impurities, second phase particles, and dislocations and twins, something like that. So, for example, already the boundary structure of the transition observation has already been done in a few groups. For example, Professor Iguara and Dr. Lee observed the grain boundary structure on the different oxygen partial pressure, and also did atomic modeling and first principles calculation, as shown in this view graph. And then in the case of grain growth, we may do a model experiment of the effect of second phase particles. If there's no second phase particles, grain growth behavior would be quite normal, but if there are some second phase particles, maximum driving force will be reduced because of the drag of the second phase particles. In that case, we will be able to observe abnormal grain growth. And if the fraction of second phase particles is further increased, then grain growth will not occur, stagnant grain growth. This is a prediction based on the mixed control of grain growth. So I think such a model experiment would be also helpful to support or to confirm our model and mechanism of mixed control. Well, Richard Feynman asked the question, if in some cataclysm all the scientific knowledge were to be destroyed and only one sentence passed on to the next generations of creatures, and what statement would contain the most information of our scientific knowledge in the fewest words? He asked this question in his lectures on physics. His answer is that all things are made of atoms. If two statements passed on to the next generation of creatures, I would say the second statement would be something like this: the arrangement of atoms governs the properties of all things. It is said that material science and engineering is four basic elements: structure, composition, processing, synthesis, property, and performance. These two elements, performance and property, is related to the requirements of the material. And these two elements related to the tailoring of material. And when we choose a composition and we do processing, we prepare samples with a certain structure. So tailoring of structure is one of the key elements in material science and engineering. So the microstructure of material is a fundamental thing, and which is a result of grain growth. So we need to further understand the grain growth. In that sense, grain growth must be an enduring key subject in material science and engineering and ceramic engineering. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Very nice talk. This is very nice work to understand the grain growth behavior or sintering behavior systematically. So, time is a little over. But if you have a question, I can accept one question. Any other? No question? Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Kang. So again.
Thank you very much.